Hello folks. So today I am going to discuss about time dilation in the concept of special theory of relativity. Special theory of relativity is very interesting and is significant for undergraduate students. For this lecture I shall be referring a by book called Optics by Ajoy Ghatak. Sixth edition. This book is very simple and easy to understand and hence is significant for undergraduate students. Now, let us start. But before going into the depths of special theory of relativity, we should first understand the few basic definitions. One of them is the meaning of the term inertial frames. Inertia, you already know that inertia is the state of a body to remain at rest or to stay in a continuous motion at a constant speed without if it is not disturbed by an external force. State of being at rest or in motion at a uniform velocity if not disturbed by an external force is called inertia. So uh, this is also the Newton's first law, which tells that without any external influence by an external force, a body which is at rest will stay at rest, and body which is moving will continue to do so at the constant speed if it is not disturbed by the external force. All the frames of references which satisfy Newton's first law of motion are called inertial frames. Inertial frames, the definition of inertial frames tells us that an inertial frame is the one inertial frame is the one which holds Newton's first law of motion. So if Newton's first law of motion is satisfied a particular frame of reference, that means it is an inertial frame. So inertial frames of reference are important in special theory of relativity because it is important in it is invoked in the first postulate. The two main postulates of special theory of relativity are special theory of relativity has two main postulates. First one is that laws of physics remain same in all inertial frames. That means if you perform an experiment in two inertial frames, the experiment will going to yield similar results. For example, if you have a pendulum, you determine the time period of oscillation of that pendulum inside a moving train. You notice you determine certain value and of the time period, and you repeat the same experiment at the platform which is stationary. So the time period of the pendulum in the two cases will come out to be same if the pendulum is same. So it will not be affected by the uniform velocity of the train. So this is because train as well as as well as the platform are both inertial frames. That means laws of physics will remain unchanged in all inertial frames. Second one is the most interesting, and it is everything special about special theory of relativity lies in this postulate. This postulate tells us that the speed of light in vacuum is c independent of the speed of the source or the observer. That means speed of light as measured in vacuum will always come out to be equal to c irrespective of the speed of the source. Whether a source was moving or not, the light it produced will always travel at the velocity c inside vacuum, and even if the observer is moving or not, he will always measure the velocity of light to be equal to c in vacuum. This is a universal hardwired truth which cannot be denied. It is an undeniable truth of the nature. We don't know why it is like this, but this is the way nature is, right? So these are the two main postulates of special theory of relativity. Based on these postulates, several interesting concepts can be understood. One of those interesting concepts is time dilation. We'll discuss about it, but let us first see this thought experiment. See that suppose there are two photons of light like this. These two photons are moving at velocity c, obviously, but in opposite directions. There are two observers each one sitting on each of the photons. Observer 1, observer 2, and there is a third observer on the ground who is stationary, who is not moving, observer 3. This is the photon 1, this is the photon 2. So obviously the photons are moving at the velocity c, but they are moving in the opposite direction. In classical mechanics, when the two objects are moving in opposite directions, the person sitting in one of the objects will feel that the other object is moving away from it with the velocity equal to the two individual velocities added together. But this won't happen in this case. The observer 1 will see that photon 2 is moving away from him at speed c only, not 2c. And similarly, observer 2 will also observe photon 1 moving away from him at speed c, not 2c. That means final velocity or velocity will not be equal to c plus c. This is absolutely wrong perception. It will not happen like this. For any of the two observers, the velocity of the other photon will always appear to be equal to c. You will not see the other photon moving away from him at 2c. That is not possible, because c is the ultimate velocity allowed in this universe. Nothing can travel faster than c. Only light is allowed to do so. Only light can travel at c. Everything travels at the speed slower than light. Nothing can travel at any speed faster than light. So it is not possible. In fact, observer 3 will also see that the two photons are moving away from each other moving in opposite directions at velocity c. So observer 3 will also observe that photon 1 is moving towards the right at speed c, and photon 2 is moving towards left at speed c. So wherever the observer is, whoever the observer is, whatever the velocity of the observer is, whatever the location of observation is, light will always appear to everyone be moving at the velocity c in vacuum. So velocity of light will always be equal to c in every case. So this is a universal truth, which is the special thing about the special theory of relativity, because of which it becomes different from the classical mechanics, right? So an interesting concept that arises because of this constancy of the velocity of light is time dilation. Time dilation is very interesting thing. Let us look at it. Let us have this experiment, this thought experiment, as Einstein used to call them. This thought experiment. Suppose you have a train which is moving at velocity, is moving at speed u towards right like this, and there is an observer present inside the train. Let us call him observer B, because there is also an observer who is sitting at the platform and is stationary. Let us call him observer A. The observer A the observer A has a reference frame. The reference frame of observer A is denoted by S, and the reference frame attached to the moving train, or the reference frame of the observer 2 or observer B, let us call it frame S prime. You see, primes are always associated with, by this it is convention that primes are associated with moving frames, and unprimed coordinates or unprimed symbols are associated with stationary frames. So the frame of reference of the observer B, who is moving along with the train at velocity u, is being labeled as S prime, and the frame of observer who is at the platform is stationary. It is being labeled by S, unprimed S. This is the train, and here this is the platform. Suppose in this train there is a mirror fitted on this wall like this. This is a mirror M, and on the other wall, on the opposite wall, there is a lamp which gives out light towards the mirror and in many other directions. It gives out light like this. There is a lamp fitted on the other wall, and on one wall there is a mirror. Now light leaves this mirror, the leave this lamp like this, goes to the mirror, gets reflected back and returns to the lamp. Suppose the distance between the two walls is h. That is, the distance between the mirror and the lamp is capital H. That means when light went from the lamp to the mirror and returned from it, it traveled 2h distance in this round trip. Observer B sees that light goes towards the mirror in this vertical direction, or in the straight away towards the mirror like this, and returns back like this. So in this way, observer B sees that light has traveled 2h distance in this round trip. But this is how the observer B is seeing this experiment to be happening. This is not what observer A sees. Observer A sees this experiment, the same experiment, in a bit different manner. He sees that observer A sees that light goes from the lamp to the mirror, not in this straight not in this straight manner like this. It is not falling on the mirror normally, rather it is going towards the mirror in an oblique manner like this. This is the perspective of observer A. Perspective of A. From A's perspective, light is not going normally towards the mirror like this, but B, who is inside the train, moving along with the train, also the mirrors fitted on the walls of the train are also moving along with it. He sees that light goes from the lamp to the mirror normally and returns back normally. However, the observer A, who sees that the train is moving continuously, and he sees that the mirror and the lamp are also moving continuously with it, he sees that light leaves the lamp. After leaving the lamp, light goes towards the mirror in oblique manner like this, and also it returns to the lamp in an oblique manner like this. This is the trajectory of light as seen by observer A. Right? This is the trajectory of light as seen by observer A. This is happening because B is not able to realize that it is in motion, that this observer is in motion, but A is aware of the motion of the train and motion of the observer B, mirror and the lamp along with it. But observer B cannot realize this because he is sitting inside the train. So for B, the light going from the one wall to the other in the normal manner like this and is returning back from it in the normal manner. However, observer A sees that light traces this oblique kind of path from a lamp, from one position of the lamp to the other. Why we are calling one position and the other position is because of the fact that, when light left the lamp, it suppose it was the position P, And when it returned to the lamp after getting reflected by the mirror, let its position be M. Let its position be, sorry, let its position be D. Location of the mirror should be let it be marked by M. So observer A sees that when light left the lamp, it left the lamp and the train was moving towards right. It left the lamp. When it left the lamp, after leaving the lamp, it headed towards the mirror, but mirror was continuously moving towards right at velocity u. So light had to travel an oblique path to reach the mirror. And similarly, after getting reflected by the mirror, it had to again trace an oblique path to return back to the lamp, but to the new position of the lamp, because lamp is also moving continuously towards right at velocity u. And in tracing this entire path, A observes that the time that got passed in this entire trip from P to M to D is delta t. So this is the time passed in this entire trip, and observer B, who is inside the train, he sees that for this round trip the time passed is t prime. Again, I want to tell you that we are using prime with this frame because it is a moving frame, and unprime time is being used for the frame of reference of the observer A. So observer A sees that to travel this entire path, delta t time was taken. Observer B sees that to cover this round trip, delta t prime was the time taken. It can be easily observed that the path traced by light according to B is smaller compared to the path traced by light according to A. So A sees that light travels a longer distance and B sees that light travels a shorter distance. That means the time as measured by observer A for light to travel from P to M to D should be greater than the time measured by observer B in this round trip. You see that this distance between P and D is equal to U delta t. U delta t is the distance between point P and D. So the total time measured by observer inside the train for this round trip is delta t prime equal to simply 2h by c, and the time measured by observer A is equal to 2 by c root of h square plus u delta t by 2 whole square. Fine. So this should be the total time taken by observer S. So delta t is equal to 2 by c h square plus u delta t by 2's whole square, which means that we are using Pythagoras theorem in this. We need to determine this expression is nothing but simply Pm plus Md upon C. To know the value of Pm, you can always use Pythagoras theorem like this. You can use Pythagoras theorem because we know that this side is h and this side, the horizontal side, is half of u delta t. So half of u delta t square plus h square, the square root of the whole, is equal to this distance Pm, and since Md is equal to Pm, this is why there is a factor of 2. So twice of this under root term is equal to Pm plus Md, divided by c. So delta t prime is simply 2h by c. Delta t as measured by observer A is pm plus md by c. So if we compare these two times, we see that delta t is equal to gamma times delta t prime, where gamma is equal to 1 over square root of 1 minus u square by c square. U square is the velocity of the train, c is the velocity of light, and this term gamma is Lorentz factor. You can easily understand that the denominator is less than 1, so value of gamma is greater than 1. So something greater than 1 multiplied by delta t means that delta t prime is smaller than delta t, or delta t is greater than delta t prime. So since a value greater than 1 is being multiplied by delta t prime, this is why delta t is greater than delta t prime. That means the time measured by stationary observer is greater than the time measured by moving observer who is moving inside the train. The time measured by stationary observer is greater than that by the observer inside the moving train. This elongation of time is called time dilation. Which means that, in other words, which can be translated as the time inside the train flows at a slower rate than at the platform. The same event that is happening, both the observers are seeing the same event, both the observers are measuring the same event, but they calculate different amounts of time, because though the event is happening for both of them, the way it is happening for them is different. One of the observer is seeing this type of path being traced by light, the other observer is seeing the other type of path being traced by light. So obviously, because they are seeing this event to be happening in a different manner, this means that they are going to obviously measure different parameters for the same event happening. So hence the time dilation concept. Now there is also an experimental evidence for this concept of time dilation, which comes from the motion of high energy particles. You know that in the upper atmosphere of the earth, the upper atmosphere of the earth receives a lot of radiation from the outer space. Suppose this is the surface of the earth, there is an atmosphere around it like this. High energy gamma rays come and hit the atmosphere from the outer space. They come from the outer space and hit the atmosphere, and after doing this, after this, few high energy particles get ejected, get produced, and they are directed towards earth like this. These are high energy gamma rays, and the particles that they are generating are mu mesons. These mu mesons, after getting generated, they are traveling towards the surface of the earth at velocity v is equal to 0.995 c. These mesons are moving towards the earth. So there was an experiment performed in which two detectors were installed. Suppose this experiment was performed at the top and the bottom of the mountain. Suppose this is a mountain. There was a detector installed at the top, and there was also a detector installed at the bottom of the mountain. Let it be detector 1 and this be detector 2. It was observed that after getting generated in the upper atmosphere, five around 568 mesons were collected by this detector, which was installed at the top of the mountain, in an hour. The height of this mountain is around 1920 meters. Height of this mountain is around this much, 1920 meters. And it was observed that 568 mesons were gathered by this detector in an hour. So it was believed that some of the mesons should be able to make it to the bottom detector after traveling this much distance. But before doing that analysis, before doing that calculation, let us first know a few important facts about the mesons. The lifetime of these mesons is T1 by 2, which is the half lifetime of these mesons is around 1.5 microseconds, and mean lifetime of the mesons is around 2.2 microseconds. Half lifetime means that after this much time has passed, half of the particles are left, rest are decayed. So half of the original number of the particles are left behind, are able to survive, and rest get decayed. Similarly, T mean or mean lifetime means that after mean lifetime has passed, 1 by E times the initial number of particles will be left, rest have decayed. So this will be the number of particles left after Tm has passed. So these are the significance of T mean lifetime and half lifetime. This is the half lifetime and this is the mean lifetime. Fine. So we need this information to know how many meson particles will be able to reach the detector 2. The distance of the distance between these two detectors is equal to the is approximately equal to the height of the mountain, that is 1920 meters. So if you use the equation of radioactive decay, that number of particles existing at time t is equal to number of particles, original number of particles or initial number of particles, into e raised power time minus of time divided by mean lifetime. So if you want to know the what shall be the time taken by the mesons to travel this much distance, so that will be calculated by, suppose we want to know the time between time of flight from detector 1 to detector 2, that means it is equal to distance 1920 meters divided by the velocity of the mesons, which is equal to 0.995 c, and this time comes out to be 6.4, around 6.4 microseconds. So 6.4 microseconds is greater than half lifetime and mean lifetime. So that means a substantial amount of mesons particles will be decayed before reaching the detector 2. If you have 568 mesons at the position of the detector 1, then the number of mesons which will be able to make it to the detector 2 will be given by that means to travel this much distance 6.4 microseconds time will be taken. So if 568 mesons are present at this height, when these mesons go to downwards to the foot of the mountain, most of them will be decayed, and in this time of flight of 2.4 microseconds, and only 31 of them will be able to survive and will be detected and will be gathered by this second detector. This is according to the calculation, as the calculation says. This calculation is being done on the basis of time of flight of the mesons between the two detectors as measured by a scientist who is sitting over here at the foot of the mountain. However, there is an interesting thing to know in this, that in actuality, when the detector 2 was observed, it was found that instead of instead of 31 particles, around 412 mesons were being detected in an hour, were being gathered in an hour. This number was very huge, substantially huge compared to the calculated number. So what was the reason for this error? Why are we not able to get the exact number? Though the calculation seems to be accurate, still the number that is actually being observed is way greater than the calculation, though there seems to be no error with this calculation. However, there is an error actually, because in this case, in making this calculation, we are using the time as observed by the scientist who is sitting, a stationary scientist who is sitting at the bottom of the mountain. This is the person who is sitting at who is in the frame of reference of Earth. So the frame of reference of Earth is being used, and the time according to the frame of reference of Earth is being used in this calculation, which is giving this erroneous result. Now let us see how this what result comes if we look at the situation from the reference frame of the mesons themselves. Now if the meson sees this experiment and the time, let us see what time the meson feels that it is going to take if it travels from detector 1 to detector 2 down the mountain. So the meson, for the meson, since meson is moving, so the time for the meson should be denoted by t prime, delta t prime, delta t prime, and from the previous equation of time dilation, we see that delta t prime is equal to delta t divided by gamma factor. Gamma in this case is equal to 1 over under root 1 minus u square by c square. For u is equal to 0.995 c, gamma is equal to 10. So that means delta t prime That means time as measured from the frame of reference of meson is equal to 1/10 of the time measured by the scientist sitting in the frame of reference of the earth. So that means meson feels that the time that has passed is equal to, while traveling down the mountain, meson feels that time that has passed is equal to 6.4 upon 10 microsecond, equal to 0.64 microseconds only, not 6.4. Meson feels that this is the time that has passed while they were traveling down the mountain from the detector 1 to detector 2. This is the very small, this time is very small, is substantially small compared to the half lifetimes, the two lifetimes, half lifetime and the mean lifetimes of the of the particles. So you see that it is only 0.64 microsecond. If you substitute this time in the same radioactive decay equation, you see that the new number the new number of mesons as being observed at the bottom of the mountain is 568 into e raised power 0.64 divided by 2.2 equal to around 425. This number 425 is the theoretical number that we are getting from this calculation using the using the meson time instead of earth's time. Instead of earth's time we are using meson's time, and we are getting this number 425, which has understandable consistency with the actual number observed at the bottom detector. The practical value was 412 and the theoretically calculated value is 425. That means there is a consistency between the two values, there is similarity between the two values, which means that it is the meson time which decides whether the meson is going to die or meter is going to decay or not. Earth's time from the frame of reference of the earth, the time from calculated from the frame of reference of the earth should not be used in this calculation, because mesons are not feeling the same value of time. Time for the earth is different. Time for the observer who is sitting on the earth, who is observing the mesons, is different than the time of the mesons themselves. Mesons are feeling a different amount of mesons are feeling a smaller amount of time. They are feeling, for them the time is flowing at a much slower rate than the rate of flow of time for the observer on the earth. So we need to consider the meson time for this calculation. So time of the meson is flowing 10 times slower than the time for the observer on the earth. So this is why now there is a consistency between the two values. That means meson, since it is moving at a tremendously high rate, so time for meson gets slow, and it is, before it gets decay, it is able to reach, most of them are able to reach the detector at the bottom before getting decayed, because the time for the mesons has slowed down. The time for mesons has become 10 times slower than the scientist sitting at the bottom of the mountain which is the frame of reference of the earth. So this was the reason for inconsistency, because initially we were considering wrong time. It was not the time of meson, it was time for us, time for the observers. But for meson the time is flowing at a slower rate, 10 times slower rate. This is why mesons were able to reach the detector without getting decayed in huge numbers. So most of the mesons were able to make it to the detector. So this explained the the abnormally greater number of mesons being detected in the second detector. So this explains the concept of time dilation along with the experimental evidence. So this is all about relativity. I hope this lecture may be helpful for you. Thank you very much.